I wish I could say I missed the first warning sign, that I was distracted, careless, sentimental. But the truth is simpler. I make my living noticing what most people breathe past. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 34, and I run a small chemical testing lab on the industrial edge of Spokane, where the river keeps its own counsel and trucks sigh on cold mornings. On that Sunday at 8 o'clock, my wife, Maya, lifted a mug with both hands like an offering and said, "Made you something special, babe." Her smile looked like a bandage, meant to cover, not to heal. Steam rose in delicate ropes. The color was wrong. Not coffee's forgiving black, not tea's clear gold. This was a crowded amber, almost brown, heavy with volatile notes that didn't settle. Bitter herbs, yes, but beneath them a medicinal base note that reminded me of the solvents we use to rinse glassware when precision matters more than mercy. The kitchen light touched the rim. My gut tightened the way it does when a chromatogram hints at a contaminant you didn't expect. We had argued the night before, the quiet kind where both people grow small to avoid exploding. I told her I was tired of being the punchline in my own house. She said I was too sensitive about jokes that were, obviously, just love with edges. Her sister, Lena, had been staying with us 3 days, moving through rooms like a weather front, making comments about my little science project and how Maya could have done better. I had learned to swallow. Swallowing is a skill in some families. It keeps the stories neat. From the living room, Lena's voice carried, bright, performative, complaining to someone about our towels, our water pressure, the way I load the dishwasher like a man who thinks in hexagons. Her laughter clicked like a lighter. I raised the mug toward my lips and watched Maya's eyes the way I watch an indicator line on a burette. Something flickered there. Anticipation. Maybe the kind of person wears when a plan is about to become a fact. "You're wonderful," I said, and kissed her cheek. I didn't drink. 2 mugs sat on the counter. The second had cooled to a friendlier scent, chamomile and honey, familiar, unthreatening. Lena walked in mid-complaint, set her phone down, and reached without asking. Finally, she said, "Something decent in this place." Maya's face went pale, the way snow looks when it remembers it will be meltwater soon. "Lena, wait." But Lena had already taken 2 long sips. "Weird aftertaste," she said. "Whatever. In my line of work, there's a rule. When the body says no, listen." The body said no. The steam that curled from my mug was carrying a story, and it was not a love story. I set the cup down. I smiled. I made a note I did not write. 2 cups, 2 intentions. Somewhere inside the quiet, a clock began. People think science is white coats and spotless glass. Mine began with calluses. 5 years of community college nights after construction days. A thermos of lukewarm coffee, riding shotgun, as I memorized half-lives and solubility rules in a parking lot under a failing light. Precision doesn't require prestige. It requires repetition. I learned to stretch paychecks, to turn a warehouse lease into a lab by laying epoxy floors myself and scavenging benches for bankruptcy auctions where entire companies sat tagged with fluorescent stickers like organs awaiting transplant. A centrifuge from a dairy plant. A fume hood that had belonged to a startup with glossy pitch decks and no runway. I wiped them down, tuned them, listened for their old songs, and taught them new ones. At first it was soil. Contractors needed permits. The city needed assurance that old gas stations weren't bleeding into the future. I gave them numbers that didn't blush. Then came water samples for the municipal team, and on better weeks a box from a small manufacturer who couldn't afford the big labs but still wanted to do right. Resins, coatings, batches that needed a conscience. Occasionally law enforcement sent something delicate, powders that pretended to be aspirin, residue from a glove compartment where bad decisions lived. The machine spoke. I translated. Maya once called me her scientist like an honor, the way some people say my pilot or my teacher. She brought pho on nights. I calibrated the mass spectrometer by hand because the auto-tune drifted in winter. She told her colleagues the story about the daycare kitchen I saved from an outbreak by finding bacterial contamination in a spice jar. We used to laugh at how tiny things, ions and microbes and whispers of solvents, decide the fate of big structures like buildings, companies, families. When Lena moved back after the divorce, gravity shifted. She arrived in a leased BMW that still smelled like someone else's leather and spoke in acronyms that preferred boardrooms to bedrooms. Pharmaceutical sales. Quotas. Regions. Real science, she said, is happening where pipelines feed the market. She wore confidence like a uniform and could pull a cappuccino from a mediocre machine by sheer force of critique. The first time she toured my lab, she petted the spectrometer the way you'd touch a thrifted coat. Cute, she said. Vintage. Maya laughed at first and told her I built something from nothing. Independent means you keep your name, she'd say, when families compared 401k matches like horoscopes. But over months, the laugh thinned. Silence moved in. At dinners, relatives asked polite questions that were really verdicts. Benefits? Stability? Plan B. In our part of Washington, respect can be a uniform too. Hospital badges, corporate emails, a parking pass that opens gates without questions. My lab wore no badge, but its results. Maybe Seattle, Maya suggested once, drawing circles on the table with her finger. A bigger lab. Less stress. I nodded and didn't say that my grandfather gave 40 years to a factory and died 6 months after retiring. His watch still shiny, his days suddenly unassigned. Independence is not the absence of stress. It's the right to choose which stress belongs to you. I kept choosing. I kept showing up before dawn, turning on the vacuum pumps, listening to the machines warm like old friends clearing their throats. The work didn't glamour anyone. It fed something steadier. It made numbers that could stand on their own feet when rooms grew full of opinions dressed as care. I replayed the scene in my head while it was still warm, the way you rerun a calibration curve because something in your hand says the line should be straighter. The mugs were identical, white stoneware with a small chip at the rim where we once bumped them together over soup. But sameness is a disguise, not a guarantee. Steam wrote different stories. Mine said meadow, chamomile, clover honey, a whisper of citrus where the kettle caught the air. The other said pharmacy basement, tannins too stern for a Sunday, bitterness carrying a metal echo that didn't belong to any plant I'd willingly brew. Maya stood between them, and when Lena reached for a cup like a crow grabbing shine, Maya moved half an inch too late. That half inch is where intention lives. Relax, Lena said, rolling her eyes at Maya's half-formed warning. She tipped the mug back with the entitlement of someone who assumes all offerings are for her. Weird aftertaste, she added. Then a shrug. Laughter. Phone re-shouldered, a life resumed. I set my mug down and let silence be my ally. In a good lab, quiet is not emptiness. It's data waiting its turn. We move through the day with the kind of care people mistake for normal. Breakfast plates, newspaper folded, the river unscrolling in the window. Small talk about weather we did not feel. I watched for the first signal. Not catastrophe, just a tap on the door. It arrived as a hand to the stomach, and a small wince Lena tried to fold into a joke. Must be your artisanal Spokane tap water, she said, and headed to the bathroom. 10 minutes later, she returned pale at the edges. The second time she didn't make a joke. By noon she was curled on the couch with a blanket and a grimace, asking if anyone else felt off. Maya fetched ginger ale like penance, whispered apologies to the air, paced, stopped pacing, started again. She said food poisoning. She said maybe the seafood from last night. She said things people say when they want the story to pick a harmless villain. I offered urgent care in the same voice. I offer a confirmatory test. Neutral, useful. We went. The doctor said, likely a 24-hour virus, and handed us instructions printed with soft graphics, the kind that pretend pain is just poor branding. On the drive home, Lena moaned theatrically and fell asleep mid-complaint. Maya stared out the window, counting something in her head. Back in the kitchen, I washed the still warm mugs. My hands are steady by training and by habit. When Maya went to adjust the thermostat for Lena's comfort, I tipped the dregs from the suspect cup into a clean sample vial and labeled it the way I label everything that might one day need to testify. Date, time, matrix, chain of custody mine. I rinsed the cup twice, Then once more, because I wanted the house to hold no residue of this lesson except the one I carried in my briefcase. People think marriages crack open like ice on a river. Loud, dramatic, a single event you can point to. Sometimes they dissolve like sugar in tea, granule by granule, until what's sweet tastes wrong, and you can't find the shape of what disappeared. We cleaned the kitchen. We lowered the blinds. We spoke to each other as if our words were fragile glass. And in my chest, a quiet meter clicked from suspicion to certainty. Night has a way of putting fluorescent light on the truth. By evening, the house sounded like a clinic without nurses. Doors opening, water running, quiet apologies making circuits through the air. Lena's symptoms marched with a methodical patience I've seen in time series plots. Mild cramps, then sharper waves, then the humiliations people pretend are just a stomach thing. She moved between guest bed and bathroom in a small orbit, pausing to breathe like someone listening for thunder. Her phone at last went dark. Maya tried to wrap it all in reasons gentle enough to live with. Could be that sushi, she said, though we'd all eaten it and only one of us was bent double. She fetched electrolyte packets and crackers and arranged them on a tray, as if composition might change chemistry. Her hand shook. She said she was worried, but the worry sounded practiced, like lines learned for a part she didn't expect to get. When she caught me watching, she held my gaze for 2 seconds too long, then looked away as if the wall had suddenly remembered something essential. I don't enjoy being right about bad things. Some people think science is a triumph over uncertainty. To me, it's an offering to it. You bring the cleanest data you can bear, and you ask your question again. After we returned from urgent care with a diagnosis designed to comfort, likely viral, rest and fluids, I tucked Lena in, placed the wastebasket within reach, and listened to her breath settle into jagged sleep. Maya spread a throw on the couch and said she'd stay nearby in case Lena needed anything. Proximity is penance. In our bedroom, I opened my briefcase and looked at the sample vial the way you look at a photograph you don't want to admit as proof. Amber dregs in clear glass, labeled in my handwriting, time-stamped by the second. I slid it back between manila folders, locked the case, and set it under the bed. The machines in my head began warming, pumps thrumming, columns conditioning. An answer was coming, and answers are not kind or cruel. They're exact. Around midnight, the house went thin. The kind of quiet where every sound arrives with a name. The heater's soft exhale, river moving its long muscle. A pipe ticked 2 rooms over. I lay awake and measured the distance between suspicion and betrayal. A span you can cross in 1 step and never return. I thought of how families disguise control as care. How we're worried about you often means we're worried you won't fold. I thought of the first years with Maya, her laughter like a bell, the way she'd brag that I could hear the truth in water. Somewhere along the way, praise had learned a new language. At 3, I got up and made tea I trusted because I watched it bloom. I didn't sweeten it. Bitterness felt honest. I stood by the window and let the cold glass claim my forehead. Across the hall, Lena coughed, a small animal sound. I didn't hate her. I didn't love her either. She was a symptom, not a cause, a noisy reagent added to an experiment already underway. The cause slept on a couch to be close, and the data I carried would ask the only question that mattered. What did you intend? Toward dawn, I slept an hour, enough to have a dream where cups switched places on their own, then stopped switching, then refused. When I woke, the river was pewter and the house smelled like the manageable kind of morning. The vial waited. So did the part of me that had learned, once and forever, that trust is not an emotion. It's a record. Machines don't care about your marriage. They learn your habits, but they don't take sides. Monday morning, I unlocked the lab, flipped breakers in sequence, and let the familiar choir begin. Vacuum pumps warming, fans settling into their steady hush, the GCMS greeting the day with a thin, electronic sigh. I signed the log, set a fresh liner, trimmed a column like a barber with a ruler, and brought the oven through its ramp as if coaxing a truth from a reluctant witness. The vial from my kitchen looked ordinary in the auto sampler carousel. One more small story asking to be translated. Chromatography is patience with a stopwatch. Peaks rose and fell, neat shoulders, a few stutters where the world insists on being complicated. The library match didn't blink at the simple things. Chamomile markers, honey volatiles, the faint zest we keep around to brighten dull Sundays. Then the other shapes arrived, compounds that don't belong to hobby teas. Cassius signatures, senna glycosides, concentrated, not a sleepy digestive blend, but a dose with intention, enough to torque a gut, strip a day of dignity, drop a body into dependence for 6 to 8 hours and leave it wrung out after. I printed spectra because paper still feels like consequence. I highlighted what mattered, wrote a plain English summary the way I do for clients who need answers they can carry into meetings without me. Senna is a stimulant laxative, I wrote. In modest tea leaf amounts, it nudges. In concentrated extract, it topples. Effects: cramping, diarrhea, dehydration, temporary incapacitation. Risks escalate with dose. This wasn't an accident of a packet mislabeled in a drawer. This was a design. I stared at the peaks until my reflection in the monitor looked like a stranger who had made it a habit to ignore what he knows. I remembered the flicker in Maya's eyes, the half-inch of hesitation when Lena reached, the way the smell under the steam felt industrial, not herbal. I tried to give the doubt a job, maybe a wellness blog, maybe a misguided cleanse, maybe clumsy kindness. But dosage is a dialect. This one was fluent in immobility. On the drive home, the river wore its winter face, flat as a sealed envelope. I practiced saying it without heat. Facts travel farther when they aren't on fire. In the kitchen, Maya moved with the domestic choreography of forgiveness. Onions sweating in a pan, radio low, the air suggesting normal like perfume suggests a person. Lena, propped at the table, narrated her ordeal to a friend on speakerphone and audited the hospital's competence like an amateur board. "How are you feeling?" I asked Maya, and my voice was the one I use when I read out results. Specific, neutral, calibrated to the human who has to hear them. "Fine," she said then, worried about Lena. She lifted a spoon, blew, tasted. I set the printouts on the counter, a quiet thud. "If I'd drunk that tea," I said softly, "I'd have been sick for most of the day. Maybe 2. Senna in concentrated extract. GCMS doesn't make up stories." Her face emptied. Not guilt, not even fear. Calculation, like someone scanning for exits in a room they thought they owned. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. I picked up the top page, the peaks black and undeniable. "You do," I said. "And you know I know." Between us, the burner ticked, then held its flame. Somewhere in the house, a door creaked and became still again. We had reached the place where evidence meets the story it interrupts. There's a kind of silence rooms make when truth crosses a threshold. The onion hissed. The radio whispered a weather update that belonged to strangers. I slid the printouts closer. "Senna," I said, each syllable placed like a slide under a lens. "Concentrated. Enough to drop me for a day. Maybe 2. I didn't raise my voice. Precision doesn't require volume. Maya set the spoon down. It clattered against ceramic, an ordinary sound that felt like an answer. "You're being paranoid," she said, pitching the words toward reason. "People drink detox teas all the time. Maybe Lena grabbed the wrong." "It wasn't wrong," I said. "It was designed. 2 cups, 2 compositions. You watch which one I would take." I held her gaze and thought of the half-inch delay, the smell that didn't belong to plants we keep for comfort. "Machines don't lie, Maya." She crossed her arms. "It read as armor, not warmth. And even if this report says what you think it says, why would I ever hurt you?" Not denial. Deflection. A sentence engineered to make me defend the feeling instead of the fact. I pointed to the line I'd highlighted for clients who don't speak chemistry. Temporary incapacitation. 6 to 8 hours. The kind of sick that keeps a person home. The kind of sick that needs help. The kind of sick that makes it easy to open a laptop you don't know the password to, until you do. Or walk a thumb drive through a file structure. Maybe with Lena's input. She's good at inputs. I tried to smile. It didn't belong. In the dining room, Lena's voice rose and fell as she retold the hospital visit to someone eager to be shocked. Our house had become a stage where everyone knew their lines except the truth. Maya's face shifted into the flat neutrality I've seen in witnesses who believe stillness is an alibi. "I would never drug you," she said. "You already did," I said quietly. "You just dosed the wrong cup." Fire wanted to enter the room. I kept it outside. "I want you to leave tonight," I said. "Stay with your mother. With a friend. I need space to decide what any of this means." "This is my house too," she said. "You don't get to kick me out because you misread a tea bag." "I get to ask for distance," I said. "After an attempted assault, I get to ask for air." The words sounded almost legal. Maybe they were becoming that. For a heartbeat, I saw the old expression, the softness she used to wear when she'd forgotten her defenses. Then calculation returned, quick as a light switching back on. She reached for her purse and keys. No suitcase. No scramble. Preparedness, pretending to be spontaneity. "When you come to your senses," she said, "call me." She walked out without looking back. The front door closed like a verdict with good manners. Lena called from the guest room, asking where Maya had gone. I said errands. She accepted the fiction, grateful for any narrative that kept her the victim and not the vector, and went back to cataloging her discomfort. I stood in the doorway of our kitchen and felt the fault line run through the tile. 8 years of story rewritten in an evening by peaks on paper and a half-inch of hesitation. I didn't break anything. I didn't shout. I turned off the burner, covered the pot, and opened a window to let the steam out. The night came in, cool and undecorated. I set the folder on the table, placed my palm on it like a pledge, and understood that love without trust is just choreography. And I was done dancing steps that led me away from myself. I've always believed that what you refuse to look at grows teeth. Wednesday morning, with the house holding its breath, I opened the drawers Maya once called her paper garden. I didn't sneak. I moved like a man checking a foundation after frost. Socks, scarves, an old badge from nursing school, a handful of birthday cards where handwriting softened our names. Then the home office, the one we pretended was shared, but which really held separate territories like countries with a border of dust. Bottom drawer, under warning booklets and instruction manuals that promised small salvations, I found a plain manila folder labeled in her clean, nurse's script. Ethan Lab. Info. I carried it to the dining table and sat down as if across from a witness. Inside, photocopies of my business license, my liability insurance, my client contracts, purchasing records, service certificates, photos of my instrument bay taken at angles only trust could provide. Financial statements I kept in a locked cabinet at the lab. P&LS with margins highlighted, revenue trends circled in a color I never use. My name was everywhere and not invited. Paper doesn't have a face, but it can still look at you. Near the back, printed emails, threads with headers neat as hospital linens. Correspondent, Caleb Reed, Business Development, Naveri Diagnostics. Subject lines like a drumbeat, acquisition opportunity, small lab consolidation, ease of transition. In the body of one email, the math that shifts a marriage, finder's compensation upon successful close, $25,000. Another message advised, creating situational pressure that clarifies the psychological cost of independence, and suggested family concern as a lever. He needs to experience his limitations, Caleb wrote, so the benefits of joining a larger organization feel self-evident. Maya replied, "I think I know how to handle this. I photographed everything, front, back, metadata if printers could bleed it. I forwarded the shots to a new encrypted drive and closed the folder with a gentleness I did not feel. Then I called a number I'd saved from a client who once needed a ceasefire more than a test result. Ada Park, attorney, practical as a clean beaker. She had me in her office by afternoon. Ada read silently, eyes moving like a scanner across barcodes. "This is theft," she said, "and conspiracy to commit fraud if they use stolen data to price you." She tapped the sent summary I'd brought like a second witness. "Combine this with the emails, and you have a pattern. Deliberate harm to induce a sale. Criminal. Maybe. Civil? Certainly. Her plan was simple the way a good method is simple. Document everything. Change every password and code. Rotate locks. Pull sensitive files from the lab to a safe location. Audit accounts. And notify key clients that any acquisition talk must go through me, not through mystery emissaries with glossy portfolios. I left her office with a list and the steadiness that comes from having a protocol. That evening I turned keys in new locks, changed Wi-Fi, bit the bullet on a hardware token I'd avoided because it annoyed me. I called my 3 largest clients and spoke in straight lines. Rumors may come. Treat them as noise. I'm not selling. You will hear from me first, last always. Each conversation ended with the quiet I've worked years to earn. Trust clicking back in a place like glassware, perfectly seated. By midnight the house felt less surveilled. The folder sat in my briefcase, heavier than paper should be. Somewhere downtown, an inbox pinged at a high-rise that believed it could read men like me as market opportunities. I poured a glass of water, tasted its blank honesty, and promised myself, if they wanted pressure, I could make a different kind. In the morning I dialed a number that wore confidence in its area code. Caleb Reed. A voice said, bright and corporate, the way elevators talk in mirrored lobbies. Mr. Reed. I answered, this is Ethan Cole. You've been corresponding with my wife about Navari's interest in a small, independent lab on the east side of Spokane. A pause, thin as fishing line. Ethan, great to finally connect. Maya mentioned you might be exploring options to reduce the friction of solo operation. He sounded like a brochure that learned to breathe. I'm exploring something, I said. Clarity. Another pause, longer. I let the silence add weight, the way a column adds separation. Let's meet today, I continued. 2 o'clock. Riverfront. The coffee shop with the big windows. He cleared his throat. Our process usually starts with a preliminary deck, or, I said gently, it starts with context you should see before your legal team does. The phone went very careful. Then, 2 it is. At 1:58, I chose a table where the light made every page undeniable. I put the folder beside my cup and watched steam braid itself into nothing. Caleb arrived on time, younger than I expected, suit speaking fluent reassurance. He set down a leather briefcase, and offered a smile calibrated for negotiations that end in handshakes. Ethan, he said, first, I want to emphasize that Navari conducts acquisitions with integrity. We create pathways for founders. Here's your pathway, I said, sliding the folder across the table. He opened it. Read. His color softened by degrees, like paper left in sun. The emails looked worse in daylight. Words that had sounded like strategy in a screen's glow turned into plain English plans to bend a life. Situational pressure, family concern, finder's compensation upon close. $25,000. These excerpts, he began, lack context. He kept his voice even. I kept mine kinder than he deserved. Context isn't the dosage, I said. You advise pressure. She administered it. My machines named it. I tapped the Senna summary on top, as if to wake it. While I was meant to be sick, she'd opened doors that belonged to me. My clients. My numbers. The interior of a business that exists because I carried it in my hands. Caleb closed a folder and looked out at the river like it might produce a script. What do you want? He asked, which is the most honest question in any room. Simple, I said. You stop pursuing my lab. You stop contacting my wife. You stay out of Eastern Washington with these tactics. And you understand that if I see Navari lean on another owner like this, the Attorney General gets the first call, your compliance team the second. He nodded once, a man counting invisible beads. And in return, I said, today is the only day we meet. The machine of the cafe hummed. Cups chimed. Someone laughed at a joke 2 tables over where life was still simple. Caleb stood. This conversation never happened, he tried. On the contrary, I said, gathering the folder, it happened exactly enough. He left with his briefcase held like a bandage that wouldn't stick. I sat a minute longer, letting the adrenaline unwind until it looked like breath again. Outside, The river kept moving east to west, the way it has always chosen. I finished my coffee, which tasted ordinary and therefore perfect, and went home to write down everything while the details were still warm. She came back on a Monday like habit wears a path through a field. Keys in the bowl, shoes aligned, coffee poured. The kitchen had memorized her. She sat where she'd stood with the mugs 8 days earlier and said, "We need to talk," like the phrase could launder what language had already done. I set the folder on the table. Paper against wood sounded final. "We have," I said, "but let's finish." She glanced at the tab, Ethan Lab, info, then opened it with a calm that felt borrowed. Her eyes moved in clean diagonals. Photocopied licenses, insurance, client lists, photos taken from angles only trust affords. Then the emails with Caleb Reed at Naveri Diagnostics. Subject lines stacked like scaffolding. In the middle, the simple math of motive. Finder's compensation upon close, $25,000. "These are private communications," Maya said. And for a moment, I admired the engineering of that sentence, the pivot from content to custody. "Between me and Caleb." "About selling my life," I said. "About applying situational pressure, so independence feels like a flaw. About using family concern as a wrench. About dosing me with senna extract so I'd be home, sick, compliant, while you walk through my files." Her face didn't crack. She stacked the pages neatly and placed both palms on them like a nurse measuring a pulse. "You can't prove intent," she said, voice cool. "Senna is in detox teas. You connected dots." "Machines connected dots," I said. "You brought the pen." I slid the printout from the GCMS across to her. Peaks like a skyline, labels that didn't stutter. Concentrations don't accidentally happen. You brewed a body into obedience. She stood, walked to the window, and looked out as if the backyard might produce an alternate version of us. "What do you want?" she asked finally. The most honest question returns. "My terms," I said, and kept my voice plain. "You signed the divorce papers I've already had drafted. You relinquish any claim to my lab, my equipment, accounts, name, or clients. You move out permanently, and you cease all contact with my business, present or future. And if I don't," the light made a small blade on her cheekbone. "Then we do this publicly," I said. "I bring the emails, the folder you compiled from stolen documents, the center results, Ada Park's analysis, the licensing board, my insurer, the state attorney general, Naveri's compliance team. Let everyone name it: conspiracy, theft, attempted assault. We let your colleagues decide which version of concern they believe." Silence turned the air thin. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard settled like a tired shoulder. She returned to the table, rested her fingertips on the folder, and weighed cost the way we all do in the end, quietly. "I need time to find a place," she said. "I don't have anywhere yet." "You have until Friday," I said. The number arrived without theatrics, like a due date on a lab order. Her mouth tightened. "That's not enough." "It was enough time to plan me," I said. "It's enough time to unplan us." She left on Thursday with 2 suitcases, a box of books, her car. The house swallowed the sound of her steps, and then had no sound to swallow. Lena texted a heart and a lightning bolt that I didn't answer. The folder went back into my briefcase. I sat at the table and listened to the river move like something that refuses to negotiate with banks. 8 years. 2 years of pressure dressed as care. 10 minutes to state terms. Sometimes justice isn't dramatic. It's paperwork with a pulse. Naveri blinked first. A courier envelope arrived that Friday like an apology wearing a tie. Letterhead clean as a sterile tray. Naveri Diagnostics will not pursue acquisition opportunities in Eastern Washington at this time. It said in careful corporate. Enclosed. A check for $25,000 labeled, returned consulting fees, services not rendered. Money that had once been the price on my future. I didn't frame it. I deposited it and called the vendor whose voice knows my machines by serial number. A week later, a crate the size of a piano bench stood in my instrument bay, and the lab smelled like new wiring and possibility. We lifted the lid, and there it was, a better mass spectrometer, sensitivity like a confession, resolution that separates what lies from what merely resembles truth. The work thickened. Word travels the way water finds downhill. A detective I'd helped once with a residue case sent more evidence. A small pharmaceutical manufacturer asked me to verify the purity of raw materials before they bet a production run on them. A city engineer wanted river samples profiled against an old spill no one had the courage to name out loud. I started saying we more often when I talked about the lab. Me and the instruments and the process, a choir, not a solo. Even my invoices fell steadier, like numbers with vertebrae. The divorce moved like a machine that had been waiting to be turned on. Papers filed, signatures traded, filings stamped with the kind of finality only bureaucracy can bless. Maya didn't contest the terms. No stake in the lab, no claims to accounts or clients, no alimony. She left the coffee maker that never frothed to Lena's standards and took the mugs. I replaced them with clear glass ones I could read at a glance. Transparency as a household policy. One Sunday in March, the house woke slow and decent. I ground beans, watched water bloom over the grounds, and listened to the small applause of the kettle. Sun moved across the table like a hand smoothing a page. The chair across from me sat empty and honest. I drank coffee I made myself and thought about all the flavors I'd once excused. How often I'd called bitterness nuance or labeled a chemical note. Must be the honey. It's easy to romanticize what hurts when you're afraid of where truth will take you. I don't hate Maya. Hate is a solvent I don't keep on my shelf. It strips too much. I keep records instead. I keep the folder, the peaks, the letter that says a corporation changed its route because a small lab owner refused to be processed. I keep the memory of the half-inch of hesitation that told me more than speeches ever did. Mostly, I keep the house quiet and the machines precise. People ask sometimes what revenge looks like when it isn't theatrical. It looks like continuity, like a key that turns only for you. Like waking in a place where no one is rearranging your life while you sleep. The best revenge isn't a spectacle. It's custody of yourself.